Welcome back, everyone. I just want to say I appreciate you guys being here for just a couple of minutes of your day. I appreciate you guys. So this is going to be a video where I'm just going to talk about Words of Radiance for about, I have no idea how long. So I am going back into the world of the Stormlight Archive, and I'm starting Oathbringer in May. So I figured I should probably post a video about Word of Radiance. I did it earlier of last year of the Way of Kings, so you guys can check out that video if you guys want. This is about, is this like the best sequel to fantasy? Now, when I read this book, I didn't read a lot of fantasy then. And now I've come over the years.
What do you mean by that?
You know, I've read a lot more fantasy. I'm currently reading The Wheel of Time, which a lot of people say is one of the greats. So I'm like, all right, we'll read that. And then I've just been reading a lot of other stuff lately. Wheel of Time is just the current one I'm reading. But I actually sat back and thought about this for a while now, since I'm reading, you know, books like Wheel of Time, because Brandon Sanderson also wrote the last 3 books of the Wheel of Time.
No way!
And so I just wanted to see his own version, I guess, of Wheel of Time. I guess that's a good way to say it. With Words of Radiance, I think what he did the best, why a lot of people say it's like the best sequel, is every single thing in the Way of Kings that he started out with, which is already like peak, if you ask me. I really liked The Way of Kings. It was one of my favorite reads when I did read it. And I got so excited to read Word of Radiance, I just jumped right into Word of Radiance. Now, why did I stop reading it? Why I never read book 3 after? I still have no idea. I literally have no idea why I never did. I just never did. Word of Radiance, every single thing you liked about The Way of Kings, the Word of Radiance just did it better. No doubt about it. I think Word of Radiance, just your expectations were this high going into, you know, book 2, and then he exceeded all of them. And maybe it's just a little bit of me that's like, oh man, what if Oathbringer just isn't as good? And that's like a scary thought to have. But Word of Radiance was just so good. I think the writing for Kaladin was even better. Dalinar kind of took the back seat a little bit, which is fine, because I like how Brandon Sanderson writes backstories for every character, like the main characters in each one of these books. Because like The Way of Kings, you had Kaladin's backstory, which was really sad, and this is Shala, I think that's how you pronounce her name. If I mispronounce her name, sorry. With her, I was actually kind of 50-50 with her in The Way of Kings. I think her motive was fine. I think it was a pretty good motive. But then you actually learn about her in Word of Radiance, and she actually became one of my favorites. I actually was looking forward to reading book 3, and I still can't explain why, because book 3, I know it's Dalinar's backstory, but Dalinar was a great character. So I'm like, why did I not read this yet? You get to learn about Shala's backstory and just how much Brandon Sanderson writes about, I guess, abuse in a way, mentally and physically, just everything, how he writes a lot of these things that we all deal with or have seen. He writes them so well that it's just you gravitate towards these characters, and I love the way he's been writing this. And I seriously could see why people are like, this is peak, because it is. I think Words of Radiance is definitely peak. And the last thing we got to talk about before I just keep rambling is the ending of this book was 10 times better than the ending of Way of Kings. So with Kaladin learning to be a Windrunner, I think that's what it was. It's been a hot minute since I read The Stormlight, and a lot of people are like, well, why don't you just reread it? It's because these books are bigger than bricks. Okay, dude, I'm not gonna reread it. I like the ending when Kaladin does become like a Windrunner, and he actually fights Zeth, and I was just, that whole thing was just so much fun to read. And then just, not even just that, but learning with more of the Stormlight aspect of this from Shala was just even better. Book 2 was really fun to read. I sit back and think, I'm like, this might be arguably one of the greatest sequels to a fantasy series ever. So I always think, when I think of really good sequels, I think of The Great Hunt from The Wheel of Time, or even The Two Towers from Lord of the Rings is really good too. So I just sit there and think, I'm like, man, is Words of Radiance better than these? And I'm a huge fan of Lord of the Rings. And I try not to compare things to Lord of the Rings because they're always all different, usually. But The Great Hunt, we'll compare the Great Hunt to Word of Radiance, because those are the last 2 frequent sequels that I'm just like, damn, this was banger. And personally, Word of Radiance was just better than the Great Hunt. Great Hunt did its job to steer away from the typical, farm boy. The Word of Radiance just exceeded everything. And in my head, I'm just trying to figure out, Brandon, where are you going with this? And I'm excited that this year, he did confirm that book 4 is coming out in, I think he said in December 6th, 2 days before my birthday. So it's like, happy birthday to me, I guess. But so maybe that's another reason why I decided to read Oathbringer and Rhythm of War later this year. But I am thoroughly excited for the series. The series was so much fun to read through the first 2 books. And I still can't explain why I never read book 3 and 4 until now. But I guess it's perfect timing. Do I think this is like the best sequel to a fantasy book series? Absolutely. Like, I think The Way of Kings is a really good introduction. I think Way of Kings was so much fun to read, and it was just interesting the way he builds worlds. Like, a lot of people always talk about his world building, it's always peak, his magic system's always peak. And sadly, I read like Mistborn last year, and I just didn't see the hype behind it compared to like this series. This series is just wow. And maybe that was just me. I thought about trying to reread with Mistborn maybe later this year and actually go through the whole trilogy, and maybe it might change my view of it. Maybe. I just really enjoy Words of Radiance. There's still a lot of things still stuck in my mind, the way that he has written these characters and just the world. And the best part is, you really get to expand with this world. My only complaint is, he's doing something I'm not a big fan of, and I'm hoping it doesn't move over into book 3 and possibly 4. But he has it in book 2 where Kaladin, Shallan, I think her name's Shallan, I think that's how you pronounce it, Shallan and Adolin, it looks like there might be a love triangle. And I'm like, oh crap. I'm not a big fan of love triangles. I just never am. So that's like that's legit my biggest complaint about this book. I have never really saw anything wrong with this book in general. But this book alone is just so banger, dude. And I'm really excited. When I think back about this and just looking forward to reading books like this again, I get really excited to read Oathbringer in May. I think it's May I'm reading it. And then I think I'm going to read Rhythm of War in September. And then December is going to be the fifth book, not the 6th book. That'd be wild. Anyways, though, yeah, so I'm pretty excited. I have like a whole this is the first time I scheduled out a TBR this year for like literally every month for 1 book each, because I want to finish Wheel of Time and I want to caught up to Stormlight. So I guess we'll see what happens. If you guys make it to the end of this video, I do appreciate it. Make sure you guys check out all my socials down below. Let me know if you guys also think Words of Radiance is your favorite sequel to a fantasy series, or if it is one of the best sequels to a fantasy series. I'd really appreciate seeing it, because I personally do. I haven't read a sequel to a series where I'm like, damn, this slaps. Like, I have, but not to the level of Word of Radiance. I binged, I think, probably the last like 200 pages in one sitting, because it was just so good. But last but not least, make sure you guys stay safe, stay hungry, and tell someone you love them. I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.